Here is my choice for the team that you need to save in the new EA College Football 25 video game. This team had an incredible foundation built, and then that legendary coach put the coaching gear aside, became the AD, and everything since then, right before they got back to the mountaintop, just all flatlines. That program, the Arkansas Razorbacks. The last 10 years, they are 53-70, 22-60 in the last 10 years in conference play. Since joining the SEC in 1992, they are 101, 155-2 in conference play. Fall-off was real. Arkansas had 53 conference wins alone in the 80s in the Southwest Conference. That's literally half of the amount of wins they have now, and they've been in the SEC for 32 years. Let's start at the beginning. Frank Broyles comes into Arkansas in 1958, and just from there, builds Arkansas into a national, recognizable program. In 19 seasons, Broyles went 144, 58, and 5. He won 7 Southwest Conference titles, and he had 10 bowl bids, and led Arkansas to a 1964 national championship. They're also the only undefeated team in that season. Now, before you say, oh, 1964, this team should have been the true national champions. Alabama has a national championship in 1964, where they lost to Texas in their bowl game, but this was at a time when they gave you the national title before the season was over, or at the end of the regular season, and Alabama lost to a Texas team in a bowl game that Arkansas had beaten, and Arkansas won their bowl game, and they were number 2, but thankfully the Football Writers Association of America awarded Arkansas a national title. The Helms also awarded Arkansas the national title. Funny enough, 6 other national championship selectors also awarded Arkansas, and this season actually started a controversy where even more buzz became about we need to move it to after the season to choose the national champion, which they did in 1965, and Arkansas actually had the chance to be national champions again, and they were kind of the reason this rule started, and then they lost their bowl game to none other than LSU and almost had back-to-back national championships. Then they went back to awarding champions at the end of the regular season until 1968 when we finally got the full adoption of giving a champion after bowl season. Here's some names you might recognize from Arkansas's 1964 national championship team. Legendary head coach Jimmy Johnson, and none other than the Jerry Jones. Also a player on this team, his name was Ken Hatfield, and you need to remember that name for later in this video. 1976, Broyles finally decides to hang it up and become AD after a 500 season, coming off of a 10-win season the year before. He just decided this is time. Guess what? In comes none other than Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz would coach at Arkansas for 7 years. He went 60, 21-2 at Arkansas. Led them to 6 straight bowl games. 2 best seasons were 11-1, 10-2, and he went to an Orange Bowl and a Sugar Bowl. Here comes the beginning of just no matter what happens, Arkansas will fail moving forward by none other than just the football gods bashing them down. After a 6-5 season in 1983, that would be the end of the Lou Holtz era. And at the time, athletic director Frank Broyles said that Lou Holtz had resigned. He had not been fired. 20 years later, it comes out that he actually was fired because Broyles said Lou Holtz's actions were negatively affecting Arkansas and Arkansas's fan base. There were reports that a big reason for his resignation, firing, was because he actually taped 2 political ads for North Carolina's then Senator Jesse Helms trying to go for re-election. I mean, come on, man. In the coach's office? This was at a time when Helms was leading the effort to try to block MLK Day becoming a national holiday. And that was his downfall at Arkansas. Nothing having to do with football performance, which is a key reason why a lot of the problems happen. Remember that Ken Hatfield name I told you to remember from the national championship team? Well, in comes Ken Hatfield. 1984, Ken Hatfield replaces Lou Holtz as the head coach at the University of Arkansas. And this guy is a Arkansas legend from the national championship team. He had the punt return against number 1 Texas that he went for a touchdown to help beat them and lead them to that national championship season. An All-American punt returner. Now, Hatfield went 55-17-1 at Arkansas. You're like, how is this going to go? Like, how does this end bad? Arkansas seems like, oh, look, here they go. They're coming back up. Not only that, he won 2 back-to-back Southwest Conference titles in 1988 and 1989. After back-to-back conference championship seasons, he leaves to go coach at Clemson. Just goes and leaves. Arkansas hero leaves its home. Why? Turns out Hatfield did not have a great relationship with then athletic director Broyles, the guy who built the program, built it what it was, who was also his head coach when he was on the championship team. So the thing was, it seems like he was breathing down his neck. And I can imagine that's not fun, having a job where someone's sitting right over you, but also at the same time, it was your coach. So it's almost like a head coach having his own coach. Easy enough, he never even visited Clemson before he took the job. Although, besides that, Hatfield does get criticized for his losing record against Texas. His bowl game record was not great. He was considered very conservative in bowl games. Still, he coached 3 teams to 3 10-win seasons. Basically, other coaches were telling recruits, and he was losing recruits to rival coaches because they were like, look, Broyles is the one running that program. It's not him. And I get, like, if you're a coach, you're like, you want to run your own thing. But also at the same time, it might have been smart for him to stay at Arkansas. He goes to Clemson. He actually wins an ACC championship and 2 bowl games, but Clemson fans necessarily aren't favorites of him. He had to follow Danny Ford, who won Clemson's first national championship. And also, remember that name, Danny Ford, for later in the video. At the time, Ford was the youngest head coach to ever win a national title. And he was basically run out of town due to an NCAA investigation that basically ended up getting cleared, but still, they wanted to be safe, which they shouldn't have done. Hatfield had early success. Then in 1992, he went 5-6. Clemson's first losing season since 1976. The saying from Clemson, Howard built it, Ford filled it, and Hatfield killed it. So, one of Arkansas's own ends up leaving because he doesn't like it. And this is right before they joined the SEC, by the way. So, going back to Arkansas after that. But we have to tie Clemson in here because guess who comes next? I said, remember Danny Ford? Well, just wait 1 second. Arkansas, in a scramble hire, needing someone quick, hires Jack Crow. Signing day was close at the time, and Crow was going to leave to Clemson with Hatfield. But Broyles promised him the head coaching job at Arkansas, so he stayed. The only issue, his 3 years at Arkansas were the worst 3 years since the early 50s. Basically 40 years of Arkansas football had not been this bad until he coached there. He went 12-21 in his 3 years. Worst stretch since going 10-20 from 1951 to 1953. So this is where it gets interesting. Everything seemed to be going so right for Arkansas for the last 2 coaches. Lou Holtz. The whole situation happens. Then you have Hatfield, who just can't handle Broyles, and then just disarray happens, and he leaves. 2 good coaches, but Holtz, that was his fault for doing something stupid. Hatfield, I guess, should have probably ended up staying, but I don't blame him for leaving either at the same time. But maybe now when you look back at it, maybe he did want to stay. So in comes Danny Ford. Yes, the coach who won Clemson's national title, who was ran away and then ended up bringing in Hatfield to Clemson. That head coach is now the head coach at Arkansas, Danny Ford. So Arkansas is now joining the SEC after their worst 3-year stretch in 40 years. Everything Broyles had built, this was the worst possible time for things to get messed up right before joining the SEC. And they came in basically with a stick, and everyone else had swords. Ford finished 26-30-1 in his 5 seasons at Arkansas. Did lead them to an SEC West championship in 1995, though, but they got obliterated by Florida. But to be fair, this was peak Spurrier at Florida time, so nobody blames them really for that. But Ford actually was a really good recruiter. He was gone after those 5 years, but the thing is, those few years that he was there, 1994 to 96, they did have 95, but those would have been the key years to really boom in the SEC, because Auburn was meh, Ole Miss was meh, Mississippi State was meh, LSU was kind of meh, Alabama at the time was really the true power there, Auburn had the 93 season, but still, there was a position to nudge yourself in there, but the cupboard had been so barren from the 3-year mess-up before that it was hard for them to adjust to the SEC, and by then, it's almost too late. As we know, the late 90s to the early 2000s is when the SEC takeover began of college football. However, though, they did hire Houston Nutt, who was actually good. Houston Nutt went 75-48 at Arkansas. During his tenure at Arkansas, Arkansas was one of only 3 programs to play in 3 New Year's Day bowl games in a span of 5 years. First 6 seasons, he led Arkansas to a bowl every year, and he averaged 8 wins a year, which from what Arkansas was before he got there the past few years was fantastic. Although his SEC record was barely over 500, and that got him criticism, still, this was progress moving forward. This is right direction. 2, they went to the SEC championship and got squashed by Georgia, and I mean squashed, but they were not built to play that Georgia team that probably could have competed and maybe won a national title. In 2003, Nutt started like 4-0 with a win over number 5 Texas. Sky high expectations. Things are going great. And then 3 straight losses. It was just the inconsistency here was crucial. Big seasons people remember Houston Nutt for 2006 and 2007. In other words, for some of you guys, you call those years Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, and Peyton Hillis. These years, he gets a lot of scrutiny for wasting talent or wasting All-Americans from the Arkansas fan base at the time, which you can't really blame them because the success is finally starting to come back, you know, and they think we're worthy to do this. And in reality, 2006, Arkansas was there. Like, they could have competed for a national title. Arkansas opened up the 2006 season, got blasted by USC, but from there, the train got back on the tracks, and it was rolling. They're sitting at number 5, and things look great. And then comes the rivalry game with LSU. LSU beats the Razorbacks. But they still get to go to the SEC championship. This is where things get crazy. If they would have beaten LSU and then beaten Florida, they probably would have gone to the national championship. But the thing is, they still should have beat Florida. They lost to Florida in the SEC title game, 38-28. But before you say, oh, they lost by 10, just listen to this. Florida goes up 17-0, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be brutal. You know, Urban Meyer's there, they're cooking. Florida's about to go on to win a national championship. And Arkansas's the new guy in here trying to get back, clawing and fighting, and they were shell-shocked. But Arkansas comes back, baby. They take the lead, 21-17. Then this play happens.
Great boomer by Wilbur. Boy, oh boy, fair catch. Oh, he fumbled it. He fumbled it. Touchdown, Florida. That's what they had in mind because they called timeout. Unbelievable mistake. One DP.
Yup. And guess what? Earlier in the game, Florida blocked a punt inside Arkansas' zone 15 that led to a touchdown. That's 14 points because of punt issues. I'm sure that play, I remember watching that as a kid. I was like, no way. You could just you could feel the air taken out of the stadium from your house. I imagine being an Arkansas fan in the Georgia Dome that day was like someone punching you as hard as they can in their stomach, because at that moment, you knew Florida's going to win. That was it. That was what they needed. Florida had lost all momentum. Everything was gone out the door. Arkansas is cooking. And then boom, that was the little slight momentum Florida needed just to go back, baby. And that was a brutal loss. And then they lose their bowl game. But, I mean, after those two games to finish the season, who gives a shit about that bowl game against Wisconsin? So then comes 2007. The guys are returning, and you're like, oh, man, here we go. Here we go. This is it. We had this success last year. Now we know what it takes. That ultimately became an 8-5 season. Started off the season 1-2 with 2 early losses to Alabama and Kentucky, and this Alabama team was nothing like the Alabama you know now if you're younger. This was like, shit, we lost to Alabama, which, yeah, is crazy to say. Just made the rest of the season an uphill battle, especially you're a run-heavy team. And fans were kind of like, they know you're going to run it, and they kept running it, which do you blame them? Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Peyton Hillis. But even with that, everyone knows what you're going to do. They got shell-shocked last year. This year they know. So there's really only so much you can do looking back at it. They did have that win over number 1 LSU at the end of the year, even though LSU still went on to win the national championship, because this was 2007 when college football basically just became insane, and LSU needed 1,000 things to happen the last week of the season to make it after losing to Arkansas, and all of those happened, so LSU won. But I advise you to go watch that game if you haven't, and just watch Darren McFadden's performance. It is one of the best college football performances in the history of college football. Houston Nutt ends up resigning from Arkansas even after all this success because there's rumors and stuff popping up and controversies just floating over him. He really is one of the best coaches in Arkansas history. The problem though, the fan base and even other people within Arkansas criticized him for just his personnel issues and obviously, like I said, failure to capitalize on the insane talent that he had. So Arkansas wanted more. They had finally gotten that taste, you know? They're like, oh, we can go back. We know what we were pretty recently in history. But Houston Nutt knew what they were at, and he's like, look where I've brought you, though. So it was kind of two ideologies going back and forth. He's like, I've done a lot to help you guys come back. And they're like, but we want more, which, I mean, it's tough, you know. Can you blame them, though? It was pretty recent that they were a national program. But still, those things butted heads, mismanagement, and ultimately, Houston Nutt just didn't feel appreciated. Also, at the same time, you got to think about everything that was happening in the SEC right now. This was the prime of the SEC football. So I can get why Arkansas fans are like, dude, we want more. Everyone else is winning. Auburn just had the 2004 undefeated season. LSU has 2 national championships in the 2000s. Florida just won a national championship and beat you to go get one. Saban is just beginning at Alabama. It just seemed like everyone around you that you had been around is just popping up and getting shit. And you're sitting there like, we had these great players. Why can't we do anything? You're like, oh, this was a dumb decision. You ran them off. But it's a dumb decision, but it's not, because in comes Bobby Petrino. And here we go again with, it looks like it's going up for Arkansas, and it just goes right back down. Petrino in his 4 seasons at Arkansas went 34-17, and you're like, but just wait. His last 2 seasons at Arkansas were 10-3 and 11-2. 5 losses, 21 wins. He took the program to their first and only ever BCS bowl game where they lost against Ohio State, but still, they were finally back to where, like, this is where Arkansas football should be. Arkansas's only losses that year were to eventual national champion Auburn Tigers with Cam Newton, who they scored the most points against them that any other team had. They lost to number 1 Alabama early in the year. Then obviously the loss against Ohio State at the end of the year. 3 losses to 3 top 10 teams, one of them being the national champion. 2011, you go 11-2, and you lose to Alabama and LSU, handily to both. But those were the 2 teams that played in the national championship. Both top 10 teams. 5 losses in 2 years. All 5 being to top 10 teams, and 2 of those losses being to national champions. One of those being to a team that also played in the national championship. So 3 teams that were in a national title, 2 of them won it. The other 2 were top 10 teams. This was Arkansas showing that it could be back and compete at the highest level. And then, sometimes it just wrecks. Football gods had struck again and said, Arkansas, no, you are not going to be good again. Petrino was involved in the motorcycle accident where he said he was alone, but he wasn't really alone. He admitted to having an inappropriate relationship, and the school couldn't trust him because of things he was telling them, and ultimately, that was it. Right before it happens, it just gets taken away again. It was there. Houston Nutt leaving actually was the right thing, but Bobby Petrino, it just got taken away. But then also at the same time, was it a bad thing because Bobby Petrino screwed it up and Houston Nutt could have probably leveled it out even further? But either way, it was the right but wrong decision, but the wrong but right decision. And then you have the interim John Smith season, which is a waste, and then Brett Bielema comes in and basically just makes them a middle-of-the-road team with a few good little spurts here and there, but he was just keeping them at a level of consistency, actually a level of inconsistency where they would win big games and then lose games, and you're like, what the hell? And that's kind of the Brett Bielema experience. Obviously, the guy who put the nail in the coffin of Arkansas coming back, Chad Morris, 4-20 and 0-16 in the SEC. And then now we have Sam Pittman, who had his great 9-4 season in 2021, but things have kind of leveled back out. But Petrino is on staff now. Either way, Arkansas just can't win an SEC championship game. They get there, they get blown out, they're usually mismatched. The one time they could have won it, just something happens, crazy football plays that normally don't happen to Arkansas. When their coaches look like they're finally coming back, something outside of the football realm happens for them to leave. They're not getting fired for performance. Houston Nutt leaves because he doesn't feel like he's appreciated, and they don't necessarily think that he appreciates that he could do more. Lou Holtz was an idiot. And then you have Hatfield, who just couldn't handle his neck being breathed down by Broyles. Kenny Ford just tried as hard as he could, just coming into it with 2 hands tied behind his back, coming into an SEC with a depleted roster. Bielema was just trying to help a program that had just gone through a really bad breakup. Obviously, Chad Morris was just like the worst hire in the history of college football. So you can save Arkansas. I know that was like a real history lesson, but I'm trying to give you context into look, they need you. No matter other programs who haven't won a national championship, this program has been teased with success coming back so many times just for it to be ripped away. So Arkansas needs you in EA College Football 25. I forgot to add, for Arkansas, you also get actually an incredible stadium and the most underrated fan base in all of college football. You get incredible, clean, traditional uniforms, and not only that, you get the Razorback logo, one of the best logos in all of sports.